They didn't come with bombs. They didn't come with fire. They came with peace. The sky above Washington, D.C. darkened without warning. Not with storm clouds, not with smoke, but with something far more unnatural. Massive black ships drifted into place, silent and unmoving, casting long shadows across the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the Capitol building. For a moment, the entire nation seemed to hold its breath. Then every screen came alive. Televisions flickered, phones lit up, digital billboards shifted in unison. Even car dashboards pulsed with a signal that hadn't been there a second before. A face appeared. Cold, reptilian, unblinking. Its eyes burned with a faint yellow glow that felt less like light and more like pressure, as if they were looking through the screen and into the people watching. Beside it stood another figure, taller, thinner, pale gray skin stretched over delicate features, its posture calm, almost reassuring. When it spoke, its voice was smooth, measured, careful. "People of Earth, we bring you harmony." Across the country, people leaned closer to their screens. No more war, no more hunger, no more division. We offer a future free from suffering, a unified existence where all may thrive together. The reptilian figure said nothing. It simply watched. "We ask only that you accept our guidance." Miles away, in the mountains of Montana, a man sat alone in a quiet cabin. The wood stove crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. Old photographs lined the walls, men in uniform, frozen in time, some who never made it back. A worn American flag hung near the window, its colors faded but still standing. He didn't move as the broadcast played, didn't react, just watched. The words sounded right, too right. Promises of peace, of unity, of an end to conflict. He had heard promises like that before. His grip tightened slightly around the mug in his hand. "Peace," he muttered quietly. "Yeah." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I've seen what men will do in the name of peace." His gaze didn't leave the screen. "And I've seen what it costs." At first, nothing changed. That was the strangest part. The highways still filled with traffic. Kids still played in backyards. Flags still waved in quiet neighborhoods. Life carried on like it always had. The ships remained above the cities, still, watching. The broadcasts continued. Always calm, always patient. The pale figure spoke often, explaining what they called their gift to humanity. Harmony chips. Small, coin-sized devices. Simple, safe, voluntary. They would eliminate illness, prevent violence, balance emotional extremes, remove the root causes of conflict itself. No more suffering, no more anger, no more division. Across the country, lines began to form. At first, just a few, then more. Outside clinics, government buildings, and newly established assistance centers, people stood patiently, waiting their turn. Some smiled. Some looked relieved. Some looked tired, like they had been waiting their whole lives for something like this. The man in Montana watched it all from his old television, day after day. He saw neighbors he recognized standing in those lines, people he had known for years. They just took the weight away, one woman said during an interview. "I don't feel angry anymore. I don't feel afraid." Another man nodded beside her. "It's like everything finally makes sense." The veteran leaned back slowly. "That's the problem," he said under his breath. "Everything's not supposed to make sense." His eyes drifted toward the flag by the window. The first real change came quietly. So quietly that most people didn't notice it. Certain words online began disappearing. Posts were flagged. Comments were removed. At first it was subtle. Then it wasn't. Accounts went silent. Entire discussions vanished overnight. On a live broadcast, a man raised his voice mid-interview. "They're controlling." The screen froze. The signal cut. Moments later, the program resumed as if nothing had happened. The host smiled calmly. "Apologies for the interruption. Let's continue." In Montana, the veteran stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. He didn't look surprised. "First thing they take," he said quietly, his voice steady, "is your voice." More changes followed. Drones appeared in the skies, not large, not aggressive, just present. They hovered above intersections, over towns, over open land, watching, always watching. The broadcasts reassured everyone. "These units ensure harmony is maintained," the pale figure explained calmly. "They exist only for your safety." Most people accepted that. Some welcomed it, but not everyone. One morning the veteran stepped outside. The mountains stretched wide and untouched. The air was cold, clean, familiar. For a moment, everything looked exactly the same. Then he heard it, a low mechanical hum. He looked up. A drone hovered above the tree line, its red sensor sweeping slowly across the land, watching. His expression hardened. "Not here," he muttered. "Not like this." He went back inside. The cabin felt different now, smaller, like something had followed him in. The television flickered again. The pale figure appeared once more, calm as ever. "For those who have not accepted harmony, we encourage you to reconsider. Unity benefits all. Resistance only prolongs suffering." The veteran stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he reached over and turned it off. Silence filled the room. Real silence, not the kind they were offering. Later that day he drove into town. It wasn't far. A small place, quiet, familiar, but it didn't feel the same. People moved differently, spoke less. There were more smiles but fewer conversations. Outside the clinic, a line stretched down the street. Longer than before. He slowed the truck, watching. A man he recognized stood near the front. They made eye contact. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The veteran gave a small nod and drove on. At the gas station, two men spoke quietly near the pumps. "Heard they're making it mandatory in some places." "Not here," the other replied. "They said it's voluntary, for now." The veteran stood there a moment longer. "For now," he repeated. He had heard that before. That night the sky seemed darker. Not from clouds, from the ships. They had moved. Not much, just enough. The next morning, the reports began. Quiet, scattered. People who refused the chip losing access to services, travel restrictions, medical limitations, nothing official. But it was happening. Back in the cabin, he sat at the table. In front of him lay a folded piece of paper, old, worn. He opened it slowly. The Constitution. He ran his fingers across the page. "Not given by government," he murmured. "Not theirs to take." He closed it carefully. And for the first time since the ships arrived, his decision settled in. That afternoon he unlocked the safe. The sound echoed through the cabin. Inside were tools from a life he thought was behind him. He checked each one, slowly, methodically, not with anger, not with fear, with certainty. Outside, the drone still hovered, waiting. As the sun set behind the mountains, he stepped onto the porch. He reached up and adjusted the flag beside the cabin, straightening it without thinking. Then he looked out across the land, then up at the sky, at the ships, at the watchers. "They can have their peace," he said quietly. He paused, his voice steady. "But I didn't fight for a world where someone else decides what that means." He turned, walked back inside. "Not this one." That night, the television stayed off, and somewhere above the earth, the watchers adjusted, because for the first time someone had said no, and this time they noticed. The next morning came colder than the last. The veteran woke before dawn, same as he always had, and sat for a few moments in the dark without turning on a light. The cabin groaned softly in the mountain chill. The old habits were still there: wake early, listen first, move second. He had learned long ago that the world usually told you what kind of day it was before you ever stepped into it. This one told him plenty. The hum was already there. Not one drone this time. Several. He rose, crossed the room, and pulled the curtain aside with 2 fingers. 3 of them floated beyond the tree line, moving in slow arcs. Their red sensors cut thin lines through the morning air, crossing and recrossing each other like they were mapping more than the land. "They're learning," he murmured. He let the curtain fall and stood there a moment, jaw set, breathing slow. Then he dressed, pulled on his jacket, and made coffee without turning on the television. By the time he drove into town, the change was easier to see. The clinic line had doubled. No one laughed, no one checked their watch, no one complained about the cold. They just stood there, waiting. As if patience had become a kind of worship. The diner on the corner still had its lights on, so he stepped inside. The bell over the door gave a tired ring. Warm grease and coffee filled the air, familiar enough to hurt. Only a handful of people sat inside. The television in the corner murmured over the clink of silverware. Dramatic decline in violent incidents nationwide. Record levels of emotional stability reported among participants. Citizens described clarity, relief, and purpose. He took his usual seat. The waitress came over with a pot of coffee. Margaret, she had worked there near 20 years. Usually she'd greet him by name, ask if he wanted the usual before he ever opened his mouth. Today she just poured. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. Her tone was flat. Not unfriendly, just empty of shape. "You doing all right, Margaret?" She gave a small nod. "Never better." The words landed wrong. He glanced up. There was a small circular mark just behind her ear, barely visible unless the light caught it. She followed his gaze for the briefest moment, then stepped away. At the counter, a man in a work jacket looked over his shoulder. "You get it yet?" he asked. The veteran took a sip of coffee before answering. "No." The man shrugged. "You should. Makes things easier. Easy isn't always better." The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he simply turned back to his plate. No argument, no sarcasm, no rough humor. That, more than anything, unsettled him. On his way out, he noticed a sign taped inside the glass door. "Harmony Compliance Recommend for all citizens recommended." He stared at the word until it started to feel like a threat wearing a smile. Outside, a drone drifted over Main Street at rooftop height. The veteran climbed into his truck, hands resting on the wheel. "For now," he said again. By afternoon, the broadcasts had changed. Still calm, still polished, but different. "Partial adoption may result in instability among non-compliant populations," the pale figure explained. "For the well-being of all communities, full participation is strongly non-compliant." A clinical word, a useful word. The kind men used when they wanted to turn disagreement into a condition. That evening he took the Constitution from the table and held it without opening it. "They don't need guns," he said quietly to the room. "They just need people to agree." Outside, one of the drones lowered until it hovered well within sight of the porch. Inside, he did not look up. The following day, the first real warning came, not from a screen but from a living voice. At the gas station, the clerk leaned in slightly as he rang up the veteran's coffee and jerky. "You hear about Collins?" The veteran shook his head. "What about him?" "Refused the chip. Twice, I heard." The clerk glanced toward the window, then back down at the register. "They came by last night." "Who?" The clerk didn't answer right away. His eyes lifted toward the sky. The veteran understood. "When'd he leave?" he asked. The clerk swallowed. "He didn't." Silence stretched between them. "He got taken?" the veteran asked. The clerk's expression tightened. "Official word is voluntary relocation for evaluation." "Official word from who?" The clerk said nothing. The veteran took his change, left the bills on the counter, and walked out. Collins had lived alone on the north side of town, down a dirt road lined with aspens. Retired electrician, Korean War father, son buried overseas. The kind of man who still fixed things for neighbors whether they could pay or not. The veteran drove by that afternoon. The place looked untouched from the road. But the mailbox was gone, and the front door hung open. No truck in the drive. No dog at the steps, no Collins. He parked on the shoulder and watched the empty house from behind the wheel. A drone floated high overhead, almost invisible against the sun. He drove home slower than usual, eyes scanning the trees, the roads, the sky. The world no longer felt uncertain. It felt chosen, and he knew which side of that choice he stood on. Days passed. Then a week. The country adjusted with frightening speed. In larger cities, Harmony chip participation became a point of civic pride. Entire neighborhoods celebrated 100% compliance. News anchors praised communities for embracing a new era of safety and mutual understanding. School districts announced optional educational enhancements for children of participating households. Employers offered incentives. Insurance providers reduced rates. Grocery chains rolled out priority services. It all came smiling. No one needed to say coercion out loud when convenience did the work. The veteran listened to reports on the radio now and then, but more often he drove with it off. He preferred the sound of the engine and the road, human sounds, imperfect sounds. One afternoon he stopped by the hardware store. The owner, Frank, had known him for years. Frank was a talker, always had been. Could turn a box of nails into a 10-minute story about lumber prices, grandchildren, or elk season. That day Frank rang him up in silence. "You all right?" the veteran asked. Frank looked up from the register. His eyes were steady. Too steady. "I'm at peace," he said. The veteran felt something cold move through him. Frank leaned in just slightly, not whispering, not quite. "You should consider it. The burden lifts." "What burden?" "All of it." The veteran stared at him. Frank smiled softly. For the first time in years, the veteran left the store without hearing a joke. The next morning, the first checkpoint appeared on the highway leading south. Not a military barricade, not sandbags, not armed men. just a polished white archway spanning both lanes, humming faintly with 2 drones suspended on either side and a sign glowing over. Community safety verification vehicles slowed, passed beneath it, and continued on. The veteran pulled onto a side road and watched from a rise. A woman in an SUV drove through without stopping. A green light flashed. The next car hesitated. A red light pulsed, and one of the drones descended until it floated at windshield level. The car reversed quickly, turned around, and left. The drone did not follow. It didn't have to. The message was clear enough. That night, the pale figure appeared again, hands folded, voice serene. Temporary verification systems are being implemented to ensure equitable access to health resources, transportation, and secure travel. These measures are not punitive, they are protective. The veteran laughed once, a hard sound. Protective, he repeated. He shut the set-off before the figure could continue. The next day, 2 local deputies came up his drive. He saw them from the porch. Young men, both of them. He knew their fathers, knew one of the boys had played baseball with his nephew years ago. They climbed out of the cruiser looking uncomfortable. He met them halfway. "Morning," one said. "Morning." The taller one cleared his throat. "We're just making the rounds, community outreach." "That right?" "Yes, sir. We're informing residents of updated access requirements. There have been some changes." "Whose changes?" They looked at each other. The taller one held out a thin packet. Official language. Friendly colors. A symbol he didn't recognize in the corner. A smooth silver circle with branching lines inside it. "Participation in Harmony integration remains voluntary," the deputy said, reciting now. "However, non-participating residents may experience temporary limits in certain service categories, including long-distance travel, emergency coordination, and distribution access." The veteran took the packet but didn't look at it. "You boys believe this?" The shorter deputy shifted uneasily. "We don't make policy." "No," the veteran said. "You make choices." Neither of them answered. After a moment, the taller one spoke again, more quietly this time. "Sir, it'd be easier if you just complied." The veteran looked past him at the cruiser, at the flag decal on the door beneath the new silver symbol. Then back to the deputy's face. "Son," he said, "men start saying things like that when they've already decided they don't mind kneeling." The words landed. He saw it in the younger man's eyes. But then it was gone. Training, fear, something. They tipped their hats, got back in the cruiser, and drove away. That night he burned the packet in the stove. The paper curled black around the edges, the silver symbol shrinking in the flames. For the first time in years, he pulled an old field notebook from a drawer and began writing names. People he trusted. People he maybe trusted. People already gone. Collins, Margaret, Frank, the 2 deputies. He wrote until the list looked less like a town and more like a wound. 3 days later, the power went out across half the county. Not for long, maybe 20 minutes. But when it came back, all local stations had been consolidated under one regional feed. The old talk show host was gone. The weatherwoman was gone. The farm report had been replaced by a smooth male voice discussing adaptive social harmony metrics. Phone service grew patchy if you called outside verified zones. Internet access slowed unless you logged through a new identity portal. Everything still worked, just not for everyone. People started saying things like system optimization and transitional inconvenience, words designed to make surrender sound practical. The veteran responded by filling his truck's tanks, stacking canned food, checking the spring above the cabin, and moving 2 crates of ammunition from the safe to a hidden compartment under the floorboards. He did not tell himself he was preparing for war. He told himself he was preparing to stay free. There was a difference. One Sunday he drove farther than usual and pulled over on a ridge that overlooked a small church and graveyard below. The parking lot was nearly full. People still came for something that hadn't been optimized yet. He stayed in the truck and watched. A drone hovered beyond the steeple, not interfering, just recording. The congregation spilled out after the service in quiet groups. No one laughed loudly. No children ran wild between the stones. Even the way they hugged each other looked restrained, as though too much feeling itself had become suspicious. Then the pastor stepped out last. Older man, broad shoulders bent slightly by age. He removed his glasses and looked directly at the drone, not with fear, with disgust. The veteran watched him stand there for a long, still moment before climbing into his truck and driving off. That gave him more comfort than it should have. Some people were still awake. A week after that, The first door-to-door chip unit arrived. It came in a white van with no visible manufacturer, escorted by 2 drones and 1 local official the veteran recognized from county meetings years ago. The official smiled too much. His face had the flush of a man desperate to be liked while doing someone else's work. The veteran met them at the porch. "Good afternoon," the official said brightly. "We're bringing access to those in more rural sectors, making the transition easier for everyone." "I didn't ask for easier." The official chuckled like they were sharing a joke. "Many who were hesitant at first have found the process deeply relieving." "I'm sure they have." A technician stepped out of the van carrying a slim case. The veteran's eyes never left the official. "We can complete integration in under a minute," the man said. "There is no pain, no risk, and immediate stabilization benefits begin within." "No." The official's smile held a moment longer, then thinned slightly. "Sir, I do need to inform you that refusal may impact your eligibility for upcoming resource allocations." "No." "There may also be future travel limitations." "No." The official drew a slow breath. "You understand that resistance creates hardship not just for yourself but potentially for your community." The veteran stepped off the porch and down onto the packed dirt. The drones adjusted position above him. "I served this community," he said, voice low and even, "before you started selling it out by the ounce." The official looked toward the drones, as if checking how much was being recorded. "That kind of language is exactly what—" The veteran took 1 step forward. The technician froze. The official didn't back up, but the smile died completely. "Get off my land," the veteran said. For a moment no one moved. Then the official nodded tightly, turned, and walked back to the van. The technician followed. The van rolled down the drive beneath the low mechanical hum of the drones. Only when it reached the road did one of the drones lower and project a pale beam against a post near the gate. A symbol flashed there briefly, then burned itself into the wood. A silver circle with branching lines, a mark. The veteran stared at it. "They brand cattle before they sell them," he said quietly. That night he chopped the post down and burned it. The next morning 2 more drones arrived. The message apparently had been understood. The first real act of rebellion happened by accident. It was near dusk. The veteran was repairing a fence line down the slope from the cabin when one of the lower drones drifted too close, perhaps scanning, perhaps provoking. It moved through the pines with the confidence of something that had never met consequence. He straightened slowly, hammer in hand, and watched it hover 10 feet away, its red sensor fixed on him. A soft tone sounded. Then a voice, not the pale figures, not human at all, issued from the machine. "Unverified subject, compliance required." The veteran looked at the drone, then at the fence tool bag by his feet. Inside lay a small hatchet, coils of wire, pliers, staples. He heard himself laugh. It had been years since he had been spoken to like an item on a clipboard. "Come on then," he muttered. The drone lowered another foot. He moved fast. The hammer flew first, hard and flat, smashing into the sensor housing. The drone jerked sideways, emitting a sharp mechanical shriek. Before it could recover, he stepped in, grabbed the lower frame with one gloved hand, and buried the hatchet into the exposed seam beneath it. Sparks burst. The machine spun wildly, clipped a pine trunk, and crashed into the slope. By the time the second drone descended from above, he had already dragged the first into a washout beneath the rocks, and covered it with a tarp and brush. The hovering drone scanned the area, emitted several rapid tones, then lifted away. The veteran stood there breathing hard, heart pounding, hand bleeding where sharp metal had sliced through the glove. He looked at the dark spot beneath the brush where the machine lay. Then he looked up at the sky. "Well," he said, "there it is." He hauled the broken drone to the barn after dark. Under lantern light he studied it like a bomb that had chosen not to go off. It was lighter than it looked. Smooth alloys, seamless joints, internal chambers too small and intricate to understand at a glance. But damage had exposed things: wiring, a pulsing blue core, tiny articulated mechanisms. He didn't know what half of it did. He knew one thing: it could be hurt. That mattered. He slept little that night. At dawn he loaded the truck with supplies and drove east instead of townward. He took old logging roads and game trails only locals still remembered. He stopped at a weathered ranch house on the edge of a broad valley where a tattered state flag snapped beside a rusted water tank. The man who answered the door was built like he'd been carved from cedar and stone. Weathered face, white beard, eyes that had seen enough to trust nothing for free. "You're a long way from your hill," the rancher said. "So are you," the veteran replied. glancing at the drone carcass under the tarp in the truck bed that earned him the ghost of a smile. They had met years before at a veterans fundraiser, then again at a county wildfire briefing. Different branches, same type. The rancher stepped aside. Get inside. By noon they had the drone laid out on a workbench in a machine shed while two other men stood watch outside with rifles resting across their arms. One was the rancher's son. The other was a neighbor who had once run cattle all the way to Wyoming and now looked at the broken machine with the deep satisfaction of a man seeing something unnatural finally dragged down. "You kill it yourself?" the rancher asked. "Didn't ask permission," the rancher grunted approvingly. They spent the afternoon taking pictures with an old digital camera and making notes by hand in case the devices were being tracked. The blue core dimmed slowly over hours. The rancher's son wore thick gloves and carefully removed several panels. "No obvious serials," he said. "No need for serials," the veteran replied. "They don't expect to lose them." The rancher spat tobacco into a can. "That may be their first mistake." They spoke little after that. Men like them didn't need much language once the shape of things was clear. By evening the rancher's wife brought coffee and stew into the shed. She set the bowls down, looked once at the machine on the table and crossed herself before leaving. The veteran watched her go. "How many like us you got around here?" he asked. The rancher shrugged. "Depends what you mean by like us. People who know what this is." The rancher took his time answering. "Enough to listen, not enough to move yet. Then they're behind. Most folks need it to hit their own porch before they call it rain." The veteran looked at the broken drone again. "It already has." The rancher nodded once. That night they turned off every light in the house and listened to the distant hum of patrol drones crossing the valley. No one said much. The rancher's son cleaned a rifle at the kitchen table. The wife folded laundry and kept glancing at the curtained window. The older neighbor slept in a chair with one boot still on. It felt, to the veteran, more like America than anything he had seen on television in weeks. Before dawn he left with a bag of feed, 2 extra fuel cans, and a hand-drawn map marking properties where, according to the rancher, the lights stayed dim and the flags still flew straight. "Don't go to town unless you have to," the rancher said. "I know, not what I mean." He looked the veteran in the eye. "Folks in there ain't all themselves anymore." The veteran nodded. He had already figured that part out. On his way home he stopped at a high overlook where he could see the highway checkpoint down below. It had grown. More arches, more drones. A white transport bus waited nearby while 2 local police vehicles idled behind it. A family in a station wagon sat pulled over on the shoulder. A woman argued with an official in a silver-trimmed vest while a little boy stared up at the drone above them. The man by the station wagon kept glancing around like he might bolt but knew he wouldn't make it 10 yards. The veteran watched through binoculars. After a minute the woman lowered her head. An official opened the bus door. The family got on. The station wagon was left on the roadside. He set the binoculars down slowly, then drove home without speaking a word. The first snow came early that year, thin at first, just enough to powder the pines and make the roads honest. It changed the sound of the world. Even the drones seemed quieter against it. By then the county had split in ways no map showed. There were those who had taken the chip and no longer argued, no longer laughed too loudly, no longer seemed to carry the rough edges that made them themselves. Then there were those who had not, who learned quickly to lower their voice in public, to store extra food, to keep old radios instead of phones, to avoid the checkpoints, to speak carefully around certain neighbors. And then there were the missing. No one listed them, no one announced them, but everyone counted. Collins, a husband and wife from a property west of town, a young mechanic who had posted something too blunt online, the pastor from the church below the ridge, gone. The veteran drove to the church the day after the pastor disappeared. The building stood open and empty. The Bible on the lectern was gone, but the hymnals remained. A drone hovered beyond the stained glass window, distorting the colored light across the pews. On the back wall someone had scratched a line into the wood with a knife point. "Do not comply." He stood looking at it for a long time. Then he added 4 more words beneath it. "Stand fast. God sees." He didn't know who would read it. He hoped somebody would. The first message reached him by radio. He had spent years keeping an old shortwave set in the cabin for storms and hunting trips. One night, while scanning through static, a voice cut in and out on a frequency no local station used. "If you can hear this, do not use state routes after dark." Static swallowed the rest. Then another voice, rougher, farther away. "Verification teams active near Billings and South Corridor. avoid clinics, avoid transport buses. The veteran leaned closer. Not alone. Then silence. He sat very still, hand on the dial. Not alone. He heard it again 2 nights later. Same frequency range, this time clearer. To any free citizens receiving, keep written records. Avoid digital devices where possible. Safe travel routes are changing daily. Do not assume local law enforcement remains independent. Repeat, do not assume. The signal broke up again. No names, no organization, no slogans, just warnings. That made it real. He began leaving the radio on low while he worked. Listening, learning, bits came through from different places. Wyoming, Colorado, Texas, the Dakotas. Checkpoints expanding. Medical access tied to compliance. Property seizures under emergency harmonization statutes. Relocation centers built near old military sites. He wrote everything down. One afternoon while hauling split wood to the porch, he found a pickup at the end of his drive. Old Ford. Mud on the wheel wells, no license plate on the front. A man stepped out, mid-30s maybe, grease under the fingernails, eyes ringed with exhaustion. The veteran did not reach for a weapon, but he didn't make the man comfortable either. You took your time getting out here, the stranger said. Depends who's asking. The man glanced once toward the sky. A friend of Doyle's, the rancher. The veteran studied him. Name? Eli Mercer. The name meant nothing. What do you want, Eli Mercer? The man looked back at his truck, then opened the passenger door. In the seat lay a metal component the size of a lunchbox, scorched black on one side and webbed with blue circuitry. Want to know if this came out of one of them? The veteran's eyes narrowed. Where'd you get it? Dropped one over a cornfield outside Miles City. The veteran stared at him for a beat. Then he stepped off the porch. Inside the barn, under covered windows and lantern light, Eli explained. He was a mechanic by trade, diesel mostly, farm equipment, rigs, generators. The first chip team had come through his town 2 weeks prior. His younger brother took it. His mother did too, said it would help with pain, with fear, with grief after their father died. Then his brother reported him for refusing, didn't even do it mean, just did it. Like paying a bill. The first time a drone came to his shop, Eli ignored it. The second time it disabled the power to his lifts and compressor. The third time it followed him onto county land and got low enough that he swung a tow chain at it from the bed of his truck, caught a rotor, dropped it. Lucky hit, Eli said. Lucky still counts, the veteran replied. Eli smiled tiredly at that. Between them, with tools spread out around the table, the pieces began to tell a story. The blue core was a power unit. The square component Eli had brought seemed to regulate communications or target mapping. Hard to know exactly, but some things were simple enough. If damaged in the right way, the machines fell. If their signal was interrupted, they hesitated. If they lost one unit, others came searching. That last part mattered almost as much as the first two. By nightfall, Eli had eaten at the table, patched a leak in the veteran's sink without being asked, and proven himself useful enough to stay. He slept in the barn loft. The next morning they tested a theory. From the broken drone carcasses and spare wire, Eli rigged a crude pulse device connected to a truck battery and a coil wrapped around an old fence post insulator. It looked like junk. Most important things did at first. They took it to a dry ravine half a mile from the cabin where drones often patrolled overhead. The veteran set the device beneath a juniper while Eli crouched beside the wires. When the machine came low enough, the veteran tossed a rock to get its attention. The drone shifted toward the movement. Now, he said. Eli hit the switch. The device snapped and spat blue-white sparks. The drone shuddered in midair, dipped violently, recovered, then spun in an erratic circle before leveling again. Both men froze. The drone emitted a rapid staccato burst, climbed sharply, and fled. Eli stared after it. That did something. Not enough. No, Eli agreed, grinning despite himself. But something. For the first time in weeks, the veteran felt the edge of possibility. Not hope exactly. Hope was soft. This was harder. By the end of the week, there were 4 men at the cabin besides the veteran, Eli. A former deputy named Harlan who had walked off after being ordered to assist in relocation transport. A Navajo trucker from Arizona stranded north of the checkpoint grid after refusing verification. And a widowed schoolteacher named Ruth who had more knowledge of county records, utility maps, and who was still free than all the men combined. No one would have called them an army. They were a table, some tools, a radio, bad coffee, and a growing list of things they refused to surrender. That was enough to begin. Ruth brought news no one liked. The county courthouse had transferred property data, utility maps, voter rolls, and gun permit records to a new regional harmonization office. Local records were being digitized and cross-referenced against chip compliance metrics. "They're building profiles," she said, placing a stack of handwritten notes on the table. "Who owns what? Who travels? Who attends church? Who withdraws cash? Who buys fuel off-pattern? Who still checks out books on constitutional law?" The veteran looked at her. "That last one yours?" She gave him the faintest smile. Eli whistled low. "So they already know who to watch." Ruth's expression hardened. "They don't just want obedience, they want predictability." Harlan, the former deputy, rubbed his jaw. "That's how they broke the force. We stopped being peace officers and became compliance support. Half the men went along because it was paperwork first and conscience later." "Other half?" the veteran asked. Harlan looked down. "Some resigned, some disappeared. Some complied anyway once their families were threatened." No one spoke for a moment. Finally, the trucker, whose name was Ben Yazzie, leaned back in his chair and said, "Then we stopped being predictable. That was the first real plan. Small at first, primitive, human. They would not fight head-on, not yet. They would move supplies off record, map patrol routes, identify unverified safe houses, warn those still waking up, test the jamming device again, maybe improve it. Maybe." The veteran listened to the discussion, then stood and walked to the shelf where the old Constitution rested beside the radio manual and a tin of loose cartridges. He picked it up. When he turned back, all eyes were on him. "I'm not leading a militia," he said. "Good," Ruth replied. "That would get us killed faster." A few weary smiles flickered. He nodded once. "Then hear this plain. We are not thieves. We are not terrorists. We are not the enemy because something wearing a uniform says so." He looked at each of them in turn. "We are citizens. Free ones. That matters because if we forget what we are, they don't have to beat us. We'll do it for them." Silence held for a moment. Then Harlan nodded. Ben did too. Eli looked at the broken drone on the table and muttered, "Well, guess we're busy." The first thing they saved was a family. A dairy farmer north of town had refused the chip. So had his wife. Their teenage daughter, scared and half ashamed of her parents' stubbornness, had nearly gone in secret until the local clinic moved up her family's evaluation review to immediate action. Ruth caught the order through a woman she still trusted at the school district office. They had maybe 6 hours. The veteran Eli and Harlan drove out under cover of a feed delivery, while Ben circled 2 miles east with one of the improved pulse devices rigged to a portable battery pack in the back of his truck. The farmer met them at the barn with a shotgun in hand, and defeat already in his face. "You can't fight them," he said. "We're not here to argue," the veteran replied. "We're here to move you." The wife was packing jars and blankets. The daughter stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, eyes red, cheeks wet. The veteran crouched slightly to meet her gaze. "You want your parents alive?" he asked. She nodded. "Then move." Outside, the hum of drones grew louder. Ben triggered the pulse from the tree line. 3 drones above the property wavered at once, dipped, and began to circle without pattern. Not downed. Confused. "Now!" Harlan shouted. They moved the family into a livestock trailer beneath a false hay cover and hauled them out the back route while Eli scattered metal scrap and reflective tarps across the yard to confuse aerial scans. By the time the transport unit arrived, the property looked occupied but disordered. No people, no cattle in the visible pens. No clear thermal reading through the hay barn because Ben's pulse rig had cooked the monitor array on the nearest drone enough to scramble range data. The family made it to a safe ranch 2 counties over before dawn. The veteran watched them go from the shadow of a windbreak. The farmer gripped his hand once before climbing into the truck. "Why are you doing this?" the man asked. The veteran looked at the wife, the daughter, the fear in all 3 faces. "Because they want you to think nobody will." Word traveled carefully after that. Not everywhere. Not openly, but enough. A scratched mark on a fence post, a folded note under a pew, a code phrase in a feed order, a truck idling twice at a crossroads then moving on. The free found ways to speak, and when they heard the old opening lines of the Declaration of Independence crackle over a hijacked frequency one night, faint, distorted, but unmistakable, some cried, some stared into the dark, some pulled their children closer. The veteran simply sat by the radio and listened. "We hold these truths." The voice faded in static before the sentence finished. Still, it was enough. The next crackdown came harder. The pale figure appeared on every major broadcast with something like sorrow in its eyes. Certain isolated communities have been misled by fear. Disruption of public safety infrastructure and unlawful interference with integration programs will not be permitted. We ask all citizens to report non-compliant activity so that no one is harmed unnecessarily. Report. There it was again. Always the same pattern. Convince the fearful they are righteous and the timid they are responsible. Within days, local hotlines appeared. Anonymous reporting portals, reward credits for actionable information, priority access tiers for compliant households. Betrayal turned into civic virtue. Ruth stopped going back into town. Harlan changed vehicles and stopped using his own name at all. Ben moved his rig at night, parking it under abandoned grain elevators or deep among cottonwoods near dry creek beds. Ely hardly slept, working by lantern light on a second-generation jammer built from drone parts, alternator coils, and enough bad wiring to kill a less stubborn man. The veteran rotated between all of them, driving old roads, carrying paper notes, moving food, checking on the families they had already hidden. He had lived through war zones before. This felt different. Foreign occupation was one thing. This was something colder, a system trying to turn the people into the tool. One bitter evening he returned to his cabin to find the front door open. His hand went to the pistol at his hip before he even thought. Inside, nothing seemed touched. Then he saw the flag by the window. It had been taken down, folded, placed on the table. Beside it sat a small silver disc no larger than a coin. Harmony chip. His face went still. No cameras visible. No official notice. No threat written down. Just the message. We were here. We can return. He picked up the flag first, unfolded it carefully. Then he carried the chip outside, laid it on a chopping block, and split it clean in two with the hatchet. Blue fluid hissed from inside and bled into the wood. He nailed the flag back in its place before dark. 2 days later, the cabin burned. It began just after midnight with a noise that jolted him awake, a muffled impact against the porch roof followed by the dry, hungry whisper of fire taking hold. He was out of bed in a breath, boots half-laced, rifle in one hand. The west wall was already lit from outside. Through the window he saw orange running across the porch timbers where something chemical burned hotter than any stray ember should. He grabbed the Constitution from the shelf, the field notebook from the table, and the old photographs from the wall in one armful sweep. Then he kicked the back door open and went through the smoke into the snow. 3 drones hovered above the cabin, just outside rifle range, watching the flames. Watching, not helping, not intervening, observing. He set the photographs and papers in the truck, and turned back to the cabin in time to see the roof sag inward. Every instinct in him screamed to save what could be saved. But another instinct, older, harder, told him the truth. The cabin was gone. The flag he had rehung by the window vanished in a sudden roar of sparks. For one impossible second he nearly stepped toward the fire anyway. Then headlights flashed from the tree line. Eli, Ben behind him in the second truck. They pulled up hard. "Move," Eli shouted. The veteran did not need telling twice. Between the 3 of them they threw what little had survived into the truck bed. 2 fuel cans, 1 tool chest, a crate of canned food from the outer shed, and the metal lockbox from beneath the porch, where he had kept spare cash and old dog tags. By the time they drove off, the cabin was a skeleton of light behind them. No one spoke for miles. At last Eli looked over from the wheel. "You want to go back?" The veteran kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, where the glow of the fire shrank behind the trees. "No," he said. And then, a moment later, with iron in his voice, "I want to win." They relocated fully after that. The ranch house, then a freight barn, then an abandoned mining camp hidden deep in the folds of the mountains where no drone could track line of sight for long without dropping low and exposing itself. Others joined. A woman who had smuggled 3 church families out of a relocation queue by swapping wristbands and paperwork. 2 brothers from Idaho who knew backcountry trails better than maps. A quiet black veteran from Georgia who had come west through 5 states and said very little until asked what he could do. "Hold ground," he answered. That seemed enough. The group grew, but not wildly. Careful growth. Deliberate. Every new face was weighed against the risk of all the others. They built cash points, learned patrol schedules, marked sympathetic homes with subtle signs only the initiated understood. They trained at dawn and dusk when thermal contrast was harder to read. Eli's jammers improved. Ben figured out that old mine tunnels muffled enough signal to hide short gatherings. Ruth developed a paper network so efficient the veteran once joked she could have run the revolution herself. "No," she replied dryly. "Those men would have ignored me too." Even he laughed at that. For all the fear, there were moments like that. Human moments, a pot of stew shared in near darkness while snow tapped the roof. A child sleeping safely in a hidden loft. A hymn sung in a whisper. Coffee so bad it became its own kind of bond. These things mattered. They were what the aliens did not understand. The first direct message from the other side came through a captured relay. Eli had modified a drone component to listen without transmitting. Most of what they pulled was machine code and routing chatter. Then one night, while the group sat around a lantern studying maps, the device emitted a clean tone and translated speech in the pale figure's voice. Localized resistance remains symbolically potent but strategically insignificant. Increased pressure on resource channels should accelerate Another voice answered, deeper, harsher, the reptilian overlord at last. Then apply pressure. Break will before they confuse defiance with identity. The room went still. The device hissed and fell silent. The veteran looked around the table. There it is, Harlan said quietly. They know exactly what they're doing. Of course they do, Ruth replied. That's why they call it harmony. The veteran folded the map shut. They break identity. They break the country. Ben leaned back in his chair. Then maybe it's time we remind people what country means. That became the next step, not just survival. Signal. They chose the courthouse town 30 miles east. Small enough not to draw overwhelming force, important enough that everyone nearby would hear about it. A Harmony banner had been hung over the old square. A silver symbol now sat where the county seal once had. Compliance teams processed relocations in the annex 3 nights a week. The plan was not to hold the town. Not yet. The plan was to hit hard. Free the detainees waiting for transport, destroy the records and leave behind something unmistakably American in the ashes. Ruth objected first. Too much exposure. Too much value, Harlan countered. It'll provoke retaliation. They don't need provoking. The argument went around until all eyes landed on the veteran. He looked at the map, then at the folded flag he now carried in his jacket pocket instead of leaving anywhere it could burn. They've spent weeks teaching people compliance is inevitable, he said. Maybe it's time they see something else. No one spoke after that. The raid happened under sleet and low cloud cover, best weather they'd had in weeks. Ben blocked the highway spur with a jackknifed grain truck 2 miles out, creating confusion and buying time. Ely and the Georgia veteran cut power to the outer scanners using a pulse rig hidden in a municipal drainage culvert. Harlan led the entry team through the side access of the annex using codes he had memorized before walking off the force. Ruth coordinated timing from the ridge with a field radio and county utility overlays spread under a flashlight hood. The veteran moved with the main team. Inside the annex, 6 families waited in a fluorescent holding room, tagged for transport by dawn. When the lights died, people screamed. Then the veteran's voice cut through the dark. Quiet if you want to live. The words worked. Harlan disabled the door control. Eli jammed the interior monitors long enough to loop empty hallway footage. The Georgia veteran carried a barricade table like it weighed nothing and smashed the inner intake office apart while the detainees stumbled free. On every desk were files, names, addresses, medical status, political donations, gun purchases, church attendance, everything. Ruth had been right. They were building lives in folders. The veteran struck the first match himself. Flames took the records greedily. Outside, drones converged over the square, but Ben's grain truck blockade had forced the nearest response unit into a longer route, and Eli's jammers kept turning clean coordination into confusion. As the families were moved into waiting vehicles, Harlan climbed the courthouse steps with the folded flag tucked under his coat. "Need a hand?" the veteran asked. Harlan looked back, rain and sleet running down his face. "No, sir." He mounted the steps alone. At the top, he cut down the silver banner with one slash of a knife. It fell into the slush. Then he tied the American flag to the old pole and hauled it up through freezing wind, while the courthouse behind him reflected orange firelight from the burning annex. For one heartbeat, the whole square seemed to stop. The flag snapped once in the night, torn, wet, unmistakable. Then the drone's blue plasma ripped into brick and stone. One burst caught the edge of the courthouse roof, showering sparks. Another blasted the flagpole halfway through, but not enough to drop it. The veteran fired upward with a modified rifle loaded for exposed sensor clusters. Beside him, the Georgia veteran dropped to one knee and fired with slow, brutal precision. Eli triggered a pulse charge from behind a statue in the square. 2 drones shuddered, One crashed into the war memorial, and another veered into the courthouse clock face in a burst of metal and glass. "Move!" Ruth's voice snapped over the radio. More inbound. They withdrew in disciplined bursts, loading the freed families into farm trucks, snowplow rigs, and one battered school bus Ruth had acquired through means no one asked about. As they pulled out of town, the veteran looked back through sleet. The flag still flew over the square, crooked, half the pole smoking, but flying. By dawn, the story had outrun the official response. Not on state channels, not on verified networks, on radios, on handwritten notes, on whispered relays. They burned the records, they freed the families, they raised the flag. The pale figure went on air before noon. Its voice remained composed. "A violent extremist cell has attacked a public safety facility, endangered civilian lives, and destroyed essential community data. Citizens are reminded that unauthorized patriotism rhetoric is frequently used by destabilizing actors to justify selfish violence." Unauthorized patriotism. The veteran heard the phrase over the radio in a machine shed 2 counties away, and barked out a laugh so sharp it startled half the room. "Good," he said. Eli looked up from a workbench. "Good? They're scared enough to name what they hate." That afternoon, the reptilian overlord appeared directly for the first time since arrival. No translator, no warmth. Its yellow eyes narrowed into hard slits. "Order will be restored," it hissed. "This territory will submit." The veteran stood listening in the shadow of the barn door. Territory. Not country, not people, not nation. Territory. He switched the radio off. "Wrong," he said. Retaliation came fast. Checkpoints doubled. Fuel distribution tightened. Entire church congregations were screened. Curfews were announced in several western counties. Drone patrols flew lower and more aggressively. Rewards were posted for information leading to the capture of those responsible for the courthouse attack. And yet, despite all that, something had changed. People who had said nothing now left cans of food at fence lines. A nurse smuggled antibiotics out of a verified clinic. A road crew deliberately misdirected a transport convoy. A sheriff in Colorado refused to sign transfer papers and vanished before dawn rather than comply. A truck stop waitress in Nebraska slid a note under a coffee cup that simply read, "We heard, keep going." The country had not risen, not yet. But it had stirred. The veteran felt it in the air, in the way men looked at the ground less and the sky more, in the way women spoke the old words to their children again. Rights, choice, liberty, oath. The work only grew harder. Winter deepened. Supplies thinned. 2 safe houses were lost. Ben took a plasma graze across the ribs during a convoy interference run. Harlan received word through a back channel that his wife had accepted full compliance to protect their sons and now refused all contact. He took the news without expression, then spent an hour splitting wood until his hands bled through the glove. No one tried to comfort him. Some grief is too proud for witnesses. One night, while the wind howled around the mining camp, the veteran stepped outside alone and climbed the ridge above the shelters. The stars were sharp. The great black shape of an orbital ship glided across them like a wound moving through heaven. He took the folded Constitution from his coat and read by red-filtered flashlight, pages trembling slightly in the cold, not because he had forgotten the words, because he needed to hear them in his own head again. When he came back down, Eli was waiting by the entrance. "Couldn't sleep?" Eli asked. The veteran tucked the booklet away. "Didn't feel like it." Eli nodded toward the sky. "You ever think maybe we can't win?" The question hung honest between them. The veteran considered it. Then he looked past Eli into the camp, where tired men and women slept on cots, where a child they had pulled from a relocation bus clutched a stuffed bear missing one eye, where Ruth had fallen asleep at a table over maps, where Ben's boots stuck out from under a blanket beside the radio, where Harlan still sat awake cleaning the same rifle he had cleaned every night since losing his family. "Every day," the veteran said. Eli waited. The veteran's voice stayed low. "Winning ain't always what people think. Sometimes winning means there's still something left worth handing forward. Sometimes it means they don't get all of it. Not your voice, not your conscience, not your children, not your soul." Eli let out a long breath. "That enough for you?" The veteran looked back up at the ship crossing the stars. "It'll have to be." In the weeks that followed, enough became a weapon. They stopped trying to control territory and started attacking confidence. A fuel depot sabotaged without casualties but with enough spectacle to show vulnerability. A transport manifest stolen and publicly read over hijacked frequencies to prove relocations were not voluntary. A church bell rung at midnight across 3 counties in coordinated defiance. 10 flags raised on 10 public buildings before dawn on the same Sunday, each one taken down within hours, but not before being seen. Every act said the same thing: "We are still here." The response grew harsher. The language grew uglier. The pale figure stopped saying hesitation and started saying contamination. The overlord stopped saying order and started saying purge. The mask had finally slipped enough for everyone to see the face beneath it. And once people see a thing clearly, it becomes harder to frighten them with pretty words. The greatest blow against the resistance should have come in March, when a coordinated sweep closed in on 3 known safe zones at once. Someone had talked, or been made to talk. Drones descended in numbers they had never faced before. Ground teams moved with purpose. For the first time, the veteran thought the whole fragile thing might shatter. Instead, it changed shape. Ruth burned the paper network before capture. Ben drew an entire drone wing off course by running a loaded rig through a canyon with a jammer wired straight into the engine block until it exploded and sent the machines chasing false heat signatures into the mountains. Harlan, with 2 others, held a bridge long enough for 37 civilians to cross and vanish into timberline. He was seen last reloading under blue fire. Eli refused evacuation until the machine shop stores were stripped of every useful part. The veteran moved from position to position, carrying children when he had to, firing when he had to, making choices no one. The veteran responded by filling his truck's tanks, stacking canned food, checking the spring above the cabin, and moving 2 crates of ammunition from the safe to a hidden compartment under the floorboards. He did not tell himself he was preparing for war. He told himself he was preparing to stay free. There was a difference. One Sunday he drove farther than usual and pulled over on a ridge that overlooked a small church and graveyard below. The parking lot was nearly full. People still came for something that hadn't been optimized yet. He stayed in the truck and watched. A drone hovered beyond the steeple, not interfering, just recording. The congregation spilled out after the service in quiet groups. No one laughed loudly. No children ran wild between the stones. Even the way they hugged each other looked restrained, as though too much feeling itself had become suspicious. Then the pastor stepped out last. Older man, broad shoulders bent slightly by age. He removed his glasses and looked directly at the drone, not with fear, with disgust. The veteran watched him stand there for a long, still moment before climbing into his truck and driving off. That gave him more comfort than it should have. Some people were still awake. A week after that, the first door-to-door chip unit arrived. It came in a white van with no visible manufacturer, escorted by 2 drones and 1 local official the veteran recognized from county meetings years ago. The official smiled too much. His face had the flush of a man desperate to be liked while doing someone else's work. The veteran met them at the porch. "Good afternoon," the official said brightly. "We're bringing access to those in more rural sectors, making the transition easier for everyone." "I didn't ask for easier." The official chuckled like they were sharing a joke. "Many who were hesitant at first have found the process deeply relieving." "I'm sure they have." A technician stepped out of the van carrying a slim case. The veteran's eyes never left the official. "We can complete integration in under a minute," the man said. "There is no pain, no risk, and immediate stabilization benefits begin within." "No." The official's smile held a moment longer, then thinned slightly. "Sir, I do need to inform you that refusal may impact your eligibility for upcoming resource allocations." "No." "There may also be future travel limitations." "No." The official drew a slow breath. "You understand that resistance creates hardship not just for yourself but potentially for your community." The veteran stepped off the porch and down onto the packed dirt. The drones adjusted position above him. "I served this community," he said, voice low and even, "before you started selling it out by the ounce." The official looked toward the drones, as if checking how much was being recorded. "That kind of language is exactly what—" The veteran took 1 step forward. The technician froze. The official didn't back up, but the smile died completely. "Get off my land," the veteran said. For a moment no one moved. Then the official nodded tightly, turned, and walked back to the van. The technician followed. The van rolled down the drive beneath the low mechanical hum of the drones. Only when it reached the road did one of the drones lower and project a pale beam against a post near the gate. A symbol flashed there briefly, then burned itself into the wood. A silver circle with branching lines, a mark. The veteran stared at it. "They brand cattle before they sell them," he said quietly. That night he chopped the post down and burned it. The next morning, 2 more drones arrived. The message apparently had been understood. The first real act of rebellion happened by accident,